Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, former Ole Miss college baseball star and Cincinnati Reds infielder Keith Kessinger joins the show. At Ole Miss, he was all SEC in baseball, while on the hardwood, Keith once hit a game-winning shot versus Tennessee. In his first major league at-bat with the Cincinnati Reds, Keith got a single off future World Series champion Kent Mercker. After his baseball career ended, Keith coached in college, including at Carson-Newman and Arkansas State, and later was a color analyst doing games for his alma mater. His father, Don Kessinger, won 2 Gold Gloves and was a 6-time All-Star with the Chicago Cubs. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. How you doing today?
Man, I am good. Beautiful day in Oxford, Mississippi, so you can't beat that.
I haven't been to Oxford in a really long time. I think last time I was there was for a tailgate on the Grove.
There's nothing quite like a Saturday in the South, and certainly Ole Miss is known for those Saturday football game days in the Grove. There's no doubt that's the cool part of living here.
What's your favorite part of tailgating at the Grove?
Oh, I think it's the getting together with family and friends and the anticipation for another big SEC football game, and just so much tradition and so many years of families getting together and meeting friends and just hanging out. And it's really hard to describe, quite honestly, if you've never been there. It's just a remarkable gathering of anywhere from 60 to 100,000 people basically in the same area prior to a football game. It's really something.
As a kid, I know you spent the early part of your life in Chicago, but how did you make it to Oxford?
When my dad was traded from the Cubs to the Cardinals, we moved from Chicago to Memphis. Not exactly sure how we missed St. Louis on the way, but we ended up in Memphis, and my dad had gone to school at Ole Miss, and so kind of grew up an Ole Miss fan, and Memphis is just about an hour from where Ole Miss is located, and all through high school, certainly was interested if I had a chance to play at Ole Miss, and that opportunity came up actually to play basketball at Ole Miss and then ultimately play both sports. And that's how originally I ended up at Ole Miss. And then after playing pro baseball and coaching college baseball at various places, ended up back at a family business here in Oxford in the real estate world.
What was it like as a kid going from being a Cubs fan to suddenly having to be a fan of the arch rival in the Cardinals?
I was probably too young to understand exactly what that meant at the time. I'm sure it was a little harder for my dad, who had obviously been a Cub for a long time through a lot of those years that people remember. And then switching over to the Cardinals, I'm sure for him was quite a challenge. As an 8 or 10-year-old, I was just glad to get on the field and play catch and do all of that. I don't know that it ever hit my brother or I, kind of that rivalry till much later on in life.
Growing up in Memphis, did you get a chance to ever meet either Elvis or Priscilla Presley?
No, we moved to Memphis, I think, just after Elvis had passed away. Matter of fact, I've never even been in Graceland. I have driven past Graceland, but didn't get to meet the Presleys.
Memphis is one of my favorite places because I think it's a really underrated eating town. So where is your favorite barbecue in Memphis?
Oh, I don't know how you can mention barbecue in Memphis without the Rendezvous downtown. Famous kind of little hole in the wall in an alley right down by where the AAA ballpark is now in Memphis. And just really a great spot, been there for generations. It's just really hard to beat that place. And generally speaking, everything about the Rendezvous is just a really cool eating adventure.
Their barbecue nachos that they do at Otto's Home Park for the baseball games are incredible.
Yes, they are. It's been a long time since I've been to a Redbird game, but as you said in the intro, I did some Ole Miss games for quite a while on the radio, and they would always have those in the press box. And it was always one of those things you really look forward to every year, was being able to get the free barbecue nachos in the press box at a Memphis game.
I'm jealous. I had to pay for my nachos. Going back to your baseball career here, and I know your dad was a multi-time All-Star, but how did your interest in baseball get piqued?
Oh, I mean, I don't ever remember a moment that I didn't want to be a baseball player. That's just kind of how a lot of kids grow up, wanting to play. And people always talk about how unusual, or ask the question about growing up with your dad being in the big leagues and how different that is. And honestly, when you're growing up in that world, you don't know any difference. I mean, that's how I grew up. Dad went to Wrigley Field and played, and then we would play in the backyard at night. So as long as I can remember, my brother and I would be playing wiffle ball in the driveway and then tennis ball in the backyard. And obviously we got old enough to play organized baseball. It's just kind of what we've always done, and we were blessed with some ability to be able to do it, and worked out good for us.
How competitive is the Kessinger family with two major leaguers? Your brother was an excellent player in college.
In every part of life, the Kessinger family is competitive. There's no question that that's been part of our deal. And then my nephew now is in the big leagues with the Astros, and my son played college baseball at the University of Memphis. If we're playing ping pong or we're playing cards or golf or putt, I mean, when the Kessingers get after it, we certainly intend to win whatever we play. So I'm sure that was part of what helped us have some success in organized sports, but certainly competitiveness is part of our nature.
As a ping pong player myself, I'm curious who's the best ping pong player in your family?
It certainly used to be my dad. He's gotten a little older now, but my dad is just really a remarkable athlete. Just amazing what he can do. Pick up a tennis racket, shoot a basketball, hit a golf ball. Just really remarkable what he could do. In his prime, none of us wanted to play dad, that's for sure.
Have you guys embraced the pickleball craze that's sweeping America?
My mom is queen of pickleball in Oxford, Mississippi. She plays all the time, 77 years old, and she's really remarkably good. And I'm talking about competitive. If you're not going to be a good partner with her, then she's going to switch partners, whether it's family or not. But part of our family has started picking it up. It's really a fun game, and it's one that you can master so quickly, or at least play at a competitive level so quickly. I think that's what made it so popular.
Your mom should go play with Rick Barry, the NBA Hall of Famer. He's a superstar at pickleball right now.
Holy cow, it's awesome. I did not know that. I certainly have seen on TV some of those national pickleball match things, but I did not know that about Rick Barry.
Getting back to baseball here, what was it like growing up playing baseball in Memphis in the early 80s?
I think probably in some ways, having left Chicago, I can remember when we first started playing organized baseball in Chicago, and the name was so familiar to people. Probably brought a little bit more spotlight or scrutiny when you're little and you're not really understanding why people are expecting this or that when you're playing. By the time we got to Memphis, I mean, certainly some people knew Dad, but I don't know that it was the same. So for me, it was just trying to have fun, play, get better, and just really enjoy the opportunity to get on the field and play baseball.
This just popped into my head. Did you get a chance to watch Bo Jackson with the Memphis Chicks?
I did. A couple times when he was in Memphis, I sure did. Talk about a remarkable athlete. I played at Ole Miss just after he had been at Auburn. So when we'd go to Auburn, we'd hear a lot of Bo Jackson stories, some of which I'm sure were true, some of which may not have been, but just certainly a remarkable, remarkable athlete.
In college, did you play against Frank Thomas?
I did. I did not want to play the infield in when I was playing shortstop with Frank Thomas hitting. You put Frank Thomas with any kind of bat, it's intimidating. You put him with a metal bat, it was very intimidating. He was certainly a large human being that could really swing the bat. That was before exit velocities became a statistic, but I can assure you that his exit velocities would have been very impressive, particularly in college.
For people who might not be as familiar with SEC baseball who are listening from around the country, could you kind of talk about the rivalries and just how competitive SEC is on the baseball field?
That's a really good question, and an interesting part of kind of being in the South in college baseball is how big college baseball is in this part of the country. I think part of it's because there's not a lot of major league teams in this area. Obviously, you've got the Braves, certainly some Cardinal fans in this part of the world, but you have to make a real drive to be able to go see Major League Baseball. College baseball has just exploded, and the interest level in it and the stadiums and the facilities and crowd bases, it really is phenomenal. And as I would travel around in minor league baseball and a little bit when I got to the big leagues, you'd realize how little interest there was in college baseball in, say, in California or in other parts of the country. And contrast that to how big a deal it is in this part of the country for 3 or 4 months every year. It really is remarkable, the difference. Talking about an Ole Miss team that averages almost 10,000 fans a game. I mean, they outdraw a handful of the major league teams, and they're not the only one. I mean, you're talking about Arkansas and LSU and South Carolina, Mississippi State. These stadiums are remarkable. The facilities for the kids are remarkable. The coverage that they get is something. It really makes for a lot of fun. And you brought up the rivalry part, and you think football with Auburn and Alabama or Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and those are certainly great rivalries, but they spill over into baseball just as much. And those were fun games to be a part of, both as a player and as a coach.
As a player, what was your favorite rivalry in the conference to be a part of?
Oh, I think that when you're at Ole Miss, certainly the Mississippi State games always probably mean a little bit more. LSU is a big rivalry to Ole Miss, and when I was going through school, it was very much on the front end of Skip Bertman's incredible run at LSU, and so they were the gold standard. And so anytime you had a chance to compete with them, that felt like it was a really big deal. But certainly Mississippi State. I mean, Ole Miss is going to play Mississippi State 4 times every year. You play the 3-game weekend series that counts in the SEC, and then you play 1 game in Jackson, Mississippi every year at the minor league stadium that just kind of for bragging rights, they call it the Governor's Cup. So those games, I think, always meant a little bit more, but they're all big when you're playing or coaching, but certainly Mississippi State games seem to mean a little more.
How did you end up at Ole Miss? I know your dad played there, but what was the recruiting process like for you?
I was a 2-sport athlete in high school and really thought I wanted to play college basketball more than I did college baseball. I certainly grew up an Ole Miss fan, and if I had the opportunity to go to Ole Miss, that's where I thought I wanted to go. And took some recruiting visits and had other places that were interested, and then Ole Miss came along kind of late in the process. I'd been offered by Ole Miss in baseball a long time before. I was more highly recruited in baseball than basketball, but wanted to play basketball, and then Ole Miss gave me the opportunity to play both sports. And as soon as that scholarship opportunity opened up in basketball, that was an easy one for me, and certainly one I've never regretted. I mean, I have been an Ole Miss fan my whole life, and now the opportunity to play there in 2 sports was really a cool deal.
How did you get your interest in basketball?
I'm sure it's part of growing up in Memphis. Memphis is very much a basketball town. It was Memphis State when I was in high school, now the University of Memphis, and certainly had an incredible run in basketball, and the city was kind of lit up with basketball interest. And my dad also played basketball in college, so I mean, we had always been a basketball family, but I think it probably had as much to do with Memphis, and basketball is a fun sport to play. I mean, it's certainly more fun to practice than baseball is to practice. I think that just over time, basketball, again, just because in high school in Memphis, basketball is a much bigger deal than baseball. And I don't know if that influenced me or I just like playing more, but I certainly wanted the opportunity to get a chance to play basketball in college and was fortunate to be able to do that.
One of my favorite names for the 80s played for Memphis, Baskerville Holmes.
Yes, he did. That is a name from the past. That was in my era of basketball. I had not heard that name in quite some time.
They made the Final Four with him, if I'm not mistaken.
They certainly in that time frame made a run or two and certainly made the Final Four. I don't remember if Baskerville Holmes was on that team. He may very well have been, but they were a national powerhouse during my era of basketball playing.
Growing up, aside from your dad, who were the athletic idols that you had?
I don't know that I really, Rob, had any. I certainly have always admired my dad and looked up to him even more off the fields and on, but maybe that's part of growing up in a family where your dad played in the big leagues. I don't know, but I didn't really have anybody. I mean, obviously, I grew up in the era of watching Larry Bird and Julius Erving in basketball. But as far as that's the guy I want to be kind of thing, honestly, for me, that was always my dad. And that's just how I looked at it, how I grew up, and never really viewed any other athletes that way.
That's interesting. You're the first person I've ever heard that didn't have an idol outside of a family member.
It was a question I didn't know was coming. But you kind of think back, and I just really don't ever remember thinking, well, if I can play shortstop like that guy, or if I can play point guard like that guy, wasn't really something that was how I thought about things.
Well, shortstop and that guy would have been your dad.
There's some truth in that for sure. That guy was right down the hall from me in high school. In his room, that's correct.
I'm guessing there wasn't, but was there any kind of pressure put on you to become an athlete of any sort?
One of the really cool things in our family is even though my dad was a Major League Baseball player, and certainly I think loved the fact that his kids played sports, my dad would have been proud of us no matter what. And so there was never any pressure. As a matter of fact, my brother Kevin and I had less pressure than a lot of people because we didn't have that dad that was trying to live through us and all that on the athletic field.
Growing up in a baseball family, I imagine there are a lot of memories on the diamond, but is there anything away from the athletic realm that you look back fondly on as a great memory?
Again, we're a sports family. I used to love going to Ole Miss football games with my dad. We weren't outdoorsy. We didn't hunt. We didn't fish. We'd play golf together. Those are some great memories playing golf, again, competitive on the golf course. But as far as kind of family time together, sports trips, I mean, that's what we did. We'd go watch Ole Miss in a bowl game or we'd go whatever. But those are memories I remember and certainly ones I'm having with my son now. And so those are really cool, kind of passed down from father to son and hopefully to son again.
Out of the bowl games, which was the favorite bowl game that you went to?
Well, I have recency bias now because Ole Miss and Penn State played in the Chick-fil-A Bowl this last year. As far as way back kind of memories with Dad, it wasn't a bowl game that I remember, but Ole Miss and SMU played football in Dallas one year. And Dad and I actually flew down to Dallas from Memphis the morning of the game and flew home that night. First of all, just really cool memory of going to that game with Dad. And don't hold me to this exactly, but Ole Miss came from behind by like 3 or 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to come back and win in overtime. Celebrating in the stands together, and that whole flying in the morning, flying back at night, not something we really ever did, but we did it that day, and that's a really fun memory for me.
As a SMU alum, that might not have been as fun a memory for me.
Trust me, as an Ole Miss fan my whole life, there are plenty of those moments that I would rather not remember, having been at games as well.
I'm pretty sure it was 1998 because it was just after I started at ESPN. That was like a 48-41 game, right?
Yeah, there was like a punt return down 4 touchdowns, and then it just kind of snowballed on SMU. And that was Deuce McAllister playing running back for Ole Miss. I think the Texas State Fair was going on at the same time during that, if I remember correctly, when we went. So just kind of memories flashing up as we're talking.
Definitely the State Fair would have been going on. That was Corey Peterson punt return, right?
That's correct. Good call. That's good, Rob. Very good. It's exactly who it was.
At Ole Miss, you got to play, I believe it was 1 season with your younger brother, Kevin. What was it like to have your brother as a teammate?
That was really cool. And it's certainly cool for Mom and Dad, too, because they spend all those years trying to travel, and we were basically never on the same teams. And so for them to be able to go to the same game and see us both, and Kevin had an unbelievable freshman year. That was probably the hardest part for me, is he out-hit me like 90% of the year, and that was my draft year. And I was one supposed to be out-hitting him. And so there was some competitive things there, but that was really fun. We had a decent year record-wise on the field, but the memory Kevin and I will always have together. I mean, he usually hit second, I hit third, and that was really a cool deal. He went on to have a tremendous college career and would have had a great pro career, but was hurt. He was an amazingly talented freshman player that pushed his older brother pretty hard that year.
Is there a game from that year that you look back on and just smile at?
There weren't a lot of games on TV in college baseball, and I can remember we did have an ESPN game against Kentucky, and of course that made it a really big deal. It's not like today when flip on the TV and either between ESPN Plus or the linear games that you can see them all the time. And so it was a big deal when ESPN came to town, because they probably didn't do but 12 or 15 games a year. And I think both of us had a really good night that night and being on TV. And I remember that being kind of a cool moment after the game where we were able to talk about playing together and playing on national TV, and just not something a lot of brothers would get to do.
That is pretty cool, because I don't remember a lot of college baseball national games in the 80s on ESPN, to be honest.
Ole Miss had just built a new stadium. ESPN came to cover that. I think that was part of the allure of coming to that game, and I don't know why it was Kentucky. But I remember it was actually Tug McGraw called it, and Tim Brando did the game with him. I do remember that, because Tug McGraw actually threw his batting practice the day before that game, which was kind of interesting. I'm not sure that happens very often, but he came out and threw a little bit, and that's definitely a memory I remember having. And I think it's because there were so few games on TV.
For listeners who may not be familiar with Tug McGraw, he's the famous scene of throwing the glove in the air for the Phillies to win the World Series. And he's the father of the country music star Tim McGraw. What was it like to face somebody who had pitched in a World Series?
At that time, Tug McGraw was a big name. Still is for baseball fans that are of a certain age. And so for us guys that were in college and had watched him play, that was kind of a neat thing. But meeting him was probably a bigger deal for a lot of us than getting to face him throwing batting practice. And certainly as my career progressed, there were other moments where I was facing guys where it mattered that you had seen play on TV. And so those are moments I remember more than facing Tug McGraw in batting practice.
Speaking of those moments, what was a moment for you that you said, I can't believe I'm in the batter's box facing this guy?
Well, I think the original first moment is when you get called up to the big leagues and you literally go from watching guys on TV or on SportsCenter or on Baseball Tonight was the show all of us in baseball watched every night. And then you're instantly facing that guy. And the first big league game and facing Kent Merker, that was something because literally I'm on the field with guys that I had the night before I was watching on TV. I think Orel Hershiser is probably the one name for me that I got to face in my short time in the big leagues that was really cool because it was in the middle of Orel Hershiser's tremendous run in the big leagues, and to get up there and get a chance and actually got a base hit against him, that's one that really stands out to me as being really cool.
Do you have the baseball of the hit you got either off of Merker or Hershiser?
I do have the first base hit ball, or at least I have the one they said that was the first base hit ball. I mean, it got tossed in the dugout and it got handed to me in the locker room after the game, and I still do have it at the house. I sure do. I have the bat that I hit my first home run with, and I have the baseball that I hit my first home run, which was really a cool story because when I hit that home run, it was my only home run. It was caught by a fan, and Barry Larkin, who was injured at the time for the Reds, he sent a bat and some of his stuff to a fan so that I could get that ball back. I didn't know that till much later, but that was really cool. And I broke that bat later on, but I saved that bat, so I've got that bat as well.
The home run, was that off Scott Sanderson?
It was. And really kind of the cool thing for me, other than the fact hitting a home run in the big leagues, which was awesome, was I was a right-handed hitter in college. I didn't become a switch hitter until my third or fourth year of pro ball. That was a hard transition. There were some really difficult times where you're facing professional pitchers and you're trying to learn to hit left-handed. Fortunately, I was able to pick up on it, and without that, I would have never made it to the big leagues. But my first home run was left-handed, and so that was really kind of cool for me because I had worked hard, had gone through some really rough at-bats along the way in the minor leagues where you just feel like you have no chance of hitting because you're just not used to hitting from that side of the plate. And then for my first and only major league home run to be left-handed, that was pretty cool.
What was the reason behind you trying to become a switch hitter?
Because my dad did it in the pros. That was one of those kind of negatives I thought at the time because my dad didn't learn to switch it till he got to the big leagues. And I was playing for Wally Moon, another big old name for people that have been around baseball a long time. I was playing for Wally Moon in the minor leagues with the Baltimore Orioles, and I was struggling against right-handed breaking balls. And Wally Moon called me in the office and said, "You're never going to make it as a right-handed hitter, and your dad learned to switch hit, so you either learn to switch hit or you're about to get released. So at that point, you decide you might want to learn to switch hit." So I don't think that conversation would have ever happened if it hadn't been for the fact that my dad learned to switch it, and I was playing for someone that knew my dad learned to switch it in the major leagues. And so I didn't learn in the major leagues, but I did learn in A-ball. Fortunately, a couple of teams gave me an opportunity to work through some really, really bad times and ultimately came out. There's no question that by the end of my career, I was a much better left-handed hitter than I was right-handed hitter.
Wally Moon, man, he must have been at least 60 at that point because he made his major league debut, I'm going to say, around 1950.
He was an older guy in baseball and very set in his ways, but ultimately, I don't make it to the big leagues without Wally Moon having that discussion. I didn't like that discussion that day very much. But without him doing that, I would have never progressed in the minor leagues. I just wasn't a good enough right-handed hitter against right-handed pitching. He told me that's what I had to do. He helped me through it. He worked with me for that rest of that year.
I just can't believe we had a Wally Moon reference. That's awesome.
Interestingly enough, years later, when I was coaching at Ole Miss as an assistant coach, we played in College Station, Texas. We were playing in a regional against Texas A&M. This was before A&M was in the SEC. And Wally Moon came out to see it. He was living in College Station and saw I was on the staff and came out to say hello. He had retired, obviously, years before that. That was really cool because, honestly, I wasn't really sure if Wally Moon liked me or not when I played for him. It's just kind of the way he managed.
When you were in college, did you have any idea that you might be drafted and where you might be drafted? And did the Orioles show any interest in you?
The truth of the matter is I was naive enough from the time I was like 10 years old. I just assumed I was going to play in the big leagues. That's what my dad did, and that's what I was going to do. Because in high school, I had turned down the opportunity to be drafted. I wanted to play college basketball, and obviously you couldn't go play minor league baseball. Plus, my family was very big on education, and they wanted me to go to school. And so I basically had spurned any interest in high school from the pro scouts. And so as college went on, certainly it seemed like I was probably a player that was going to get drafted. And the draft is such a weird deal. I mean, you have teams tell you all sorts of things, and I certainly anticipated going considerably higher than the 36th round. I'd been told I was going to go higher, and Certainly part of the connection with the Orioles was Roland Heeman was the general manager at the time. And Roland Heeman had been the general manager of the Chicago White Sox when my dad was player manager of the White Sox. I'm sure my name came up on that draft board, and I probably was the only 36th round pick in history that the general manager called when they drafted and not the area scout. But I remember Roland Heeman calling me and saying they had drafted me and it was time to go to work. And so that's what I did.
A couple years later, the Orioles traded you to the Reds. Did that come to you as a surprise?
No, I think because I was kind of in the middle of my switch hitting, trying to learn it, and I had just not had much success. And I really think that Orioles, for the most part, had given up on me as a player, having learned much more later on. I think that the Reds just needed a guy in A-ball to fill in. I could play a lot of infield positions, and they just needed a guy to finish the season. I think they fully intended to release me at the end of the year, and I played well enough that they didn't. And then you just keep making teams and you make managers like you. So it was a good thing for me because, like I said, I wasn't getting to play a whole lot with the Orioles. I think they had made up their mind. I wasn't going to be able to learn to switch it well enough to make it. And the switch was really good. The A-ball manager named Frank Funk was in the Midwest League. It was Cedar Rapids, and he believed in me, played me a lot, made me feel really good about it. And that switch hitting started to come on. And I think really impressed on the Reds to give me at least one more year to see where I went. And fairly quickly after that, I moved up and made it all the way to the big leagues.
Because you became a coach after your career, was there anything that you learned from Frank Funk, Wally Moon, even somebody like Davey Johnson that you were able to take to your coaching career and impart on your players?
I think you take a little bit of everybody. There are always things pro and con that you think, okay, that really worked well, or my personality meshed really good with this guy because of this. I think that what I really like were the guys that were very, very positive influences. And so I like guys that I thought really believed in me as a player, whether they did or they didn't. The one that really comes to mind for me that really helped me a bunch as a player was Mark Bombard. He was in AAA with the Reds, and he just dealt so much confidence into his players, just a great personality. It really made people believe in themselves. And I think probably more than anything, that's the kind of thing I would take. And certainly the baseball knowledge. I mean, you can't help but have baseball knowledge when you're around those kind of guys. And I think all of that stuff went into coaching. And then I'm not going to take away anything from the biggest influence for me is my dad, always has been, in both baseball and in life. It was such a great sounding board when you're playing. It was a great sounding board when you're coaching. Just be able to use his knowledge was invaluable.
From the coaching side, what's a piece of knowledge that he imparted on you that you took to your coaching career?
Oh, I think just to invest in your players. Certainly the scoreboard judges you as a coach. I mean, there's no question, but there's so much bigger things when you're having the chance to influence young men that matters. And I think that Dad did such a good job of imparting, really investing in your players, love on your players, understand they're not robots that play baseball, and really try to make them better people. And my son's now in coaching. My son's coaching at Pensacola State College in Pensacola, Florida. I'm hoping that that's the kind of coach he's going to be, that really invests in the players, loves on his players, and really takes pride in what they do both on and off the field.
How important is it to communicate properly with your players? Because not every player has the same personality.
That's what the good guys do really well, right? They figure out the buttons to push, because there's no question that there's some guys that need to be loved on all the time, and there's some guys that you have to push in different ways. And the good guys figure those buttons out and how to push them and when to push them really well. Guys that aren't quite as good and don't have as much success sometimes I think aren't able to do that as well. But like in every walk of life, I manage 30 agents now in my real estate business, and it's the same thing. Not every one of them are you able to treat exactly the same way. You want to treat them all fairly, and you certainly want to give everyone the same opportunity. But there's certainly ways that you have to adjust exactly the way you go about treating people and the problems that they have and how you poke and press and prod and all that to make them, in my world now, the best real estate agents they can be. And certainly when I was coaching, the best they can be on the field.
How did you decide to hang up your spikes and say, maybe I need to start looking at something else, be it coaching or something other than playing baseball?
The leaving the play-in part for me wasn't that difficult. I had gotten to the big leagues and then had spent the next 3-ish years back in AAA. And I was 29 years old by the time I finished playing. And my chances of long-term being in the big leagues, it was pretty much gone. I mean, I certainly had the opportunity to bounce back and forth. And if you get in the right opportunity, maybe you can spend a little bit more time in that. But for the most part, I had become that veteran minor league with very little big league experience kind of player. And an opportunity came up to coach at Ole Miss. Pat Harrison took the Ole Miss coaching job from Pepperdine. We had some mutual friends. I certainly had let people know that I was interested in getting into coaching. Every pro organization I had been with wanted me to coach once I finished playing for them. The Reds almost didn't trade me to the Cubs. Jim Bowden, who's now on the MLB Network, Jim Bowden was general manager, and I remember him calling, telling me that it was probably best for my baseball career if they traded me to the Cubs, but that he really wanted me to manage in their minor league system. And what I promised him that if he traded me, I'd give them the first chance, that if I got back into pro side, that I would give them the opportunity. Of course, I wanted to play for the Cubs at the time, so I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I think coaching had always been something that I was interested in doing. And so when the opportunity came up, it was in the middle of a AAA season. Almost made a coaching change and got that opportunity to go directly from being a AAA baseball player to being an SEC assistant coach was something that I felt like I had to do. This is kind of an interesting little side story. I was in the lineup with the Cubs, got the call the night before that said, hey, if you want this Ole Miss coaching job, it's yours. I took the job. I go in the next morning and said, hey, I'm done. I'm retiring. My manager in AAA, Ron Johnson, said, well, I actually need you to play today because we don't have anybody else to play shortstop today, but we wish you the best of luck after that. And sure enough, I go out my very first at bat that night and hit a home run. My wife, who I think was ready for me to coach and not play, was panicked I'd probably change my mind after hitting a home run my first at bat. I proceeded to go 1 for 4, so I proceeded to do my normal night, just getting the one hit. And then that was it. So my last game in professional baseball, I hit a home run, and the next day I was coaching college baseball.
That's got to be nice to have your last hit be a home run.
Yeah, I didn't hit a lot of home runs. That was certainly unusual. And that was a right-handed home run. I almost never hit right-handed home runs. So that was kind of a fun thing. My teammates who all knew I was leaving gave me a really hard time when I came in the dugout, but that was a cool deal. Wish it would have been the big leagues, not in AAA, but that was a fun moment. And then when it came time just to finish the thought on the coaching part, I was the head coach at Arkansas State. I've been an assistant coach at Ole Miss and then the head coach at a good Division II program at Carson-Newman College, and then went to Arkansas State and have been there 6 years. And that situation was difficult. We were underfunded in our league. We didn't have the facilities other people had. The school had offered me a contract extension. We had had some success. We were doing fine. It was a difficult job. And I really had told them that in order for me to keep believing I could be successful there were just some things they had to do, from assistant coaches' salaries to facilities to recruiting budget. And they just weren't willing to do it. And so I just said that I'm not your coach anymore. And I was one of the few guys that didn't get fired as a head coach. And my dad and my brother had a really successful real estate business in Oxford, Mississippi. I'd always had interest in real estate. And so in 2008, I coached my last game, and now I'm in my 16th year of doing real estate.
While you were at Arkansas State, I know they played Ole Miss a few times. What was it like to face your alma mater?
Those were special games. First of all, when you're at Arkansas State, which is a good baseball program, but certainly not at the level that Ole Miss was at the time and still is, anytime you were competing against an SEC school as a Sun Belt school, those were big games. But there were some personal things, and having coached at Ole Miss, and kind of weird the first couple of times you're being in the, quote, wrong dugout when you're playing. But so many family, so many friends, so many administrators here at Ole Miss that I knew. I mean, we had some success. I mean, we beat Ole Miss a few times. Matter of fact, we beat them once when they were number 1 in the country. And from a coaching standpoint, those are literally some of the best moments I had in coaching, were coming back and competing against Ole Miss and competing well.
You mentioned it briefly, but prior to Arkansas State, you were at Carson-Newman, which is a really good Division II school. I actually know it more for football than I know for baseball. But what was it like to go from Ole Miss, SEC baseball, to a Division II school and not maybe having some of the same facilities and recruiting budget and being able to get maybe some of the players you were looking to get?
That might be the understatement of all time to say it didn't have quite the budget. The pattern at the time for guys to become head coach was the ADs were looking for guys who had been head coaches. It's changed a little bit now. There's a lot more assistant coaches that are getting big jobs as head coaches or bigger jobs from being an assistant. And so I felt like that was a move that I needed to make. Carson-Newman was a great place. Such a cool place to live, Jefferson City, Tennessee, over by Knoxville, beautiful part of the country, wonderful people. Carson-Newman, as you said, was an absolute powerhouse of Division II football. I mean, every year in the playoffs. They really cared about sports. And so if you're going to go to a Division II school, you certainly want to go where you have a chance to compete and win. And there wasn't any question that you could win at Carson-Newman in all the sports. And so we were able to have some success. But I mean, you go from charter flight type things to literally driving 15 passenger vans. I mean, my wife and I would make peanut butter jelly sandwiches for our meals between double headers. My wife and my kids ran the concession stand. But they were really great memories, and we had a lot of success and won a lot of games, and we coached some super kids, and I will always have fond memories of Carson-Newman. I was very glad to get the opportunity to get back in Division I at Arkansas State. Looking back, I don't know if that was the best move, because Arkansas State, as I said, was a really difficult spot as it turned out to try to win. But Carson-Newman was a great learning experience as a head coach, and you get to make some mistakes there without the spotlight of message boards and the scrutiny that you get at a lot of Division I schools. And so I think that in many ways, the opportunity to learn when it's your program was great for me at Carson-Newman.
At Carson-Newman, you just mentioned that you can make a mistake and learn from it, not be under the spotlight. What was something that you learned from that you took not only to your coaching career at Arkansas State, but just in life as well?
That's a great question. And Ken Sparks was the football coach at Carson-Newman. And Coach Sparks was truly a legendary coach. Could have left really every single year to go to big programs and just never did. And I remember very early on at Carson-Newman, I was only there a couple of years, but early on we had a situation where some players did some things, and my inclination was that they needed to be off the team. I was a young head coach, and I thought the hard thing to do was to kick them off and make a point. And I remember Coach Sparks calling me in and said, "Hey, I know what happened here, and it's your program. You can do what you want to do, but what are you going to gain by kicking these kids off the team?" And I was like, well, they broke this rule, and they know what the consequences are, and the other kids will know. And he said, why don't you give yourself a little bit of time and space? Why don't you think about it? Why don't you pray on it? Because he said, here's what I want you to think about. He said, what influence will you have with those young people once you kick them off the team? What will you be able to do to change what they're doing? What will you be able to do to influence them to try to make them better people? And I said, well, none. He'll be gone. And he said, exactly. He said, I really think you need to think about that and decide. Give yourself time and space when you have to make those kind of decisions. Don't make those kind of decisions very, very quickly. You have time. There's absolutely no reason you can't give yourself time. And I will tell you, that has been such a life lesson for me. I didn't kick those guys off the team, by the way. I mean, it was a great decision. Never had another issue with them, and was able to give them structure and give them some reasons to change their behavior. But more than that, even today in my business world, if you have a decision that is difficult, rather than make a split-second decision that may be the right one, there's no reason not to give yourself time and space to try to make those decisions. Pray on it, think about it, ask people their opinions on things. And that's probably the single biggest lesson I ever learned in coaching, certainly at Carson-Newman. You don't have to make those difficult decisions instantly.
Now that you're in the real estate business, how do you force yourself maybe to say, take a step back, don't make a rash decision?
Well, I mean, certainly there are times that if someone has hired you as their agent or is using you as their agent, whether it's to list a property or to buy a property, your expertise, that's the reason you're there. You are the pro. You're the person that's supposed to know the market. You're supposed to know where value should be. And there are definitely times, as we have seen nationwide, and certainly Oxford is not immune to that, remarkable price increases on some things that you do wonder whether it's the right purchase for someone or not. And those are the discussions that you have to have with your client. And if all of us have crystal balls and we knew exactly what the market was going to do, I would be on a beach somewhere right now, because I would have bought a whole lot more stuff 3 years ago and sold it. So you give your best advice. Hopefully your experience and your expertise in a market is able to prepare you to give good advice to clients. And that is certainly advice I have given people.
What's your favorite part about being in the real estate business?
It is so similar to coaching, where you go recruit and you're dealing with different people from different parts of the country. And we have so much of that here because Oxford's a town where it's very much a retirement place for people that come Oxford's gotten a lot of national publicity as one of the top 10 small towns in the country to retire to. And then dealing with students from around the country. I do a lot with the athletic department at Ole Miss for coaches from around the country. But anyways, just dealing with people. I just think that part of the job is fantastic. And certainly when you're able to find the right house for the family and so that they can get themselves rooted and settled, and those are cool. It certainly gives you great satisfaction.
Going back to the coaching career for a moment here, with the NIL and recruiting that it is now, how much has that changed college sports?
Incredibly. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they manage rosters. Basically, it's free agency every year for every player. And there's no pro league that could possibly survive that. I mean, if you didn't have multi-year contracts and you didn't know what your roster was going to look like next year, how would the Reds do that? How would the Cubs do that? How would the Dallas Cowboys do that? I do not understand how the current model is sustainable. Forgetting the paying players part, I mean, that genie's out of the bottle, good, bad, or otherwise, players are going to get paid. I think somehow, some way, the constant free agency for players, and there really is no other word for it, you can build a team, and that's what these guys are now having to do. I don't think there is building programs really anymore. And I think that's the huge difference is you're just building next year's team, and then you build the team after that. Instead, there's just not going to be nearly as much identifying guys in the 9th, 10th grade in high school, recruiting them, then making a good evaluation there, and then developing them for the first couple of years in college when maybe they're not playing that much, and then their time comes to play. And that's how you build a program. Now those guys aren't staying those first 2 years when they're not playing. And I don't blame those kids because the schools are going to go out and get someone in the portal that they think is better than the guy sitting their bench. But it is what it is, and that is the new model. And certainly there'll be people that are good at it, and there are going to be people that aren't as good at it. And that's a discussion I have with my son all the time. I mean, I'm thankful for him that this is the only coaching he knows, because I have a lot of friends in coaching still, a lot. And I don't know a single coach that's been in the game 20 years that likes anything about coaching today. I mean, nothing other than the money. They like the money today. Every other part of it, the NIL, the transfer portal, kids having agents, just the whole deal that's so different in college than it has been. For my son, he won't know any different. That's the world he's walked into. And like I told him, there's going to be people that are good at it, and he needs to be one of them that's good at it.
I know there's a little bit of hindsight involved here, but are you glad you got out of college coaching when you did?
There's parts of the game you miss. I think every coach would tell you, and I think if they don't tell you that, they're not telling you the truth. The competition part, the working with the kids, the working on Tuesday on something in the batting cage and then watching it on Friday night work, or working in the bullpen with a pitcher and seeing that progression, and a team that's worked really hard and then having success. Those are things that you always will miss once you get out of coaching. There is no question. The players coming and wanting more money to stay, those things would be really, really hard for somebody who had coached prior to NIL to deal with. I'm never going to say that I wish that I had done this or that. I made the decision to get out of coaching. I have been able to stay around the game through both radio, and I do a lot of ESPN Plus and SEC Network Plus TV broadcasts. That kind of scratches the itch a little bit for me, and I think that's where it's going to stay because it's a young man's sport now for sure, and I'm no longer that young man.
As a TV analyst and radio analyst, what's the best part of seeing the game from the press box as opposed to the dugout?
I think the most interesting thing for me from seeing the game from the press box is the amount of luck and fortune in any one game that changes the outcome of that game. I'm still a believer that over the course of the season, the good teams win more than the bad teams, and the good players get more hits than the bad. I mean, I think that's why you play 3-game series, and that's why baseball plays a lot more games than everybody else. But when you're in the press box and you realize a ball that hits 1-inch foul, there's nothing the hitter did different to make it 1-inch foul, or the ball that takes a bad hop, or the ball that gets lost in the sun. Those can be game changing, and there's nothing you can do to coach that differently. And I think that realization, because when you're in the dugout, you don't ever view it that way. I mean, it's because we didn't do this here or we didn't do that here. And there's certainly some truth in that. I mean, there's never one single play that costs you a game. But I think from the analyst standpoint, when you see how many of those things, again, when you're not in the dugout and you're not caught up in that moment and you're just watching and you think, wow, if that ball would have just stayed fair or that ball would have just gone foul, how different the outcome of the game would have been. And that was nothing that anybody did different. It's just the way the ball bounces. And I think that's probably the most eye-opening thing for me. From that 30,000-foot level in the press box, you do realize all those things that affect games so much. That's really been an interesting, again, kind of eye-opener for me.
Do you like the idea of instant replay and the challenges, regardless of the sport, that are being used?
100%. The call should be right. And if you have the ability to get the call right, then you should do it. I mean, we can argue over how long it takes in one sport or another or how it's viewed. But if you can get the call right, you should be able to get the call right.
Yeah, I am not a fan of replay. And the reason I am not is if coaches can make mistakes and players can make mistakes, I think an umpire or referee should be able to make one. And I firmly believe one call should not change the game.
Well, it shouldn't, but it can. The difference in where I'd have an argument with you is that a coach can't go back and change it. There's nothing that can be done. He can't go, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't hit and run there. Let's go back and do that differently. If something obviously is wrong with a call, it can be changed. And look, I'm biased because I was in a dugout, and if a call cost me a game and that game ultimately cost me a job because I didn't make the NCAA tournament, I would want to get the call right. And so I'm just a big believer in that.
We've talked a lot about college baseball, but do you still watch the major leagues?
Certainly since my nephew Gray got to the big leagues with the Astros, paid a whole lot more attention to the big leagues than I did before. I would say that I basically have become a passive Major League Baseball watcher, but to sit down at night and watch the Cubs and Cardinals or Dodgers, Reds, that would not have been what I would do. I would be much more likely to watch a college baseball game just because of what I'm doing now and where I live. Once Gray got called up a year ago, June, I did become much more of an Astros fan, watching their games most nights, whether he played or didn't play. So I became more in tune with the Major League game than I had been previously.
In college, I know it's common for a player to play the outfield and then pitch the following day. But when you see somebody like Ohtani do it at the major league level before he got hurt, is there any kind of extra respect you have for a player to be able to do that?
Sure. I mean, to be able to do either one at that level is so remarkable. You have to be so gifted. As a guy who struggled to get just a little bit of time in the big leagues, you realize how many guys are really, really good. And for him to be literally the best at two things at the same time, it's a generational thing that we probably will never see again. It's just insane how physically gifted he is and how hard he works at his profession. It's one thing to be really good, and obviously some of that is God-gifted ability, but he certainly has done everything to maximize that, and to become the player that he is, you have to have ultimate respect for it, and you understand why he fills stadiums everywhere he goes, because we're not going to witness that again probably in our lifetime.
One thing I want to get in here before I let you go, and we talked a little bit about your mom and her pickleball prowess earlier, but since we've talked so much about your dad, how important was your mom growing up?
Early in my brothers and my lives, I mean, my mom was certainly around even more than dad, because dad playing Major League Baseball has certainly gone some of the time. I mean, my dad was unbelievable at creating time for us, even when I'm sure he didn't feel like creating time for us. But mom has always been a driving influence. We laugh, but the most competitive person in my family is my mom. When I was playing pro baseball, everybody was like, well, you must have gotten that from your dad. And I'm like, no. If you met our family, my mom is the most competitive person in our family, and it's not close. So much of that drive and competitiveness came from mom. She has been a huge blessing, not only for my brother and I, but been such a great grandmother to our kids.
What's a favorite story you have with your mom?
I think just probably generally speaking, her being in the stands after games. Unfortunately, my dad was coaching college at Ole Miss when I got to the big leagues, and he, of course, thought like I did that I'd be in the big leagues a long time, and that didn't happen. And so he actually never came to a big league game that I played in, but mom did. I can remember being in Denver playing, and mom flew in and watched, and just seeing mom after the game, and she had watched dad play so many years of Major League Baseball, and then her to be waiting after the game and us to go eat dinner. That's a great memory for me. How proud she was, because she knew how hard I had worked to get where I was. And she understood more than probably any mom on that team did what it took to be a Major League player. So that's a great memory I have with mom.
Keith, I want to thank you so much today coming on the I Play 2 podcast and talking about your baseball career, your coaching career, getting your first major league hit off Kent Merker, and now your successful real estate career. Continued success, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate the time. Appreciate the opportunity.